Normally, cards which increase your opponent's life points have the effect as a detrimental drawback, because it's tied to some other kind of stronger effect. And usually, cards that only have the effect to increase your opponent's life points were meant to be purely detrimental, except when comboed with two very specific cards. So in this list, we'll be looking at some of the cards which are really good and give your opponent life points, or just give your opponent a whole bunch of life points. And at number 10, we have Dark Cure. Dark Cure is a continuous trap card which has the effect that every time your opponent summons a monster, your opponent gains life points equal to half the attack of the summoned monster. But if your opponent summons multiple monsters at the same time, then they only gain life points equal to one of them. The effect is not once per turn, so theoretically, this card has the potential to give your opponent the most amount of life points out of all the cards on this list. However, this is entirely dependent on your opponent performing an action, so it can't really be controlled. And if you're playing a Nurse Burn deck using cards like Bad Reaction to Samochi or Nurse Burn Reficule, your opponent can counter the card by not summoning any monsters. Although most strategies do need to summon monsters in order to do things. So chances are, it might actually be pretty useful in those kinds of decks, even if there's slightly better cards you can use instead, which would probably take up some of the higher spots on this list. And at number 9, we have Soul Taker. This is a normal spell card which allows you to destroy one monster your opponent controls, then your opponent gains 1000 life points. And this card has actually seen competitive play over the years, specifically because it's one of the few cards in the game that allows you to just target one monster of your choice to destroy that doesn't lose you any card advantage. Soul Taker is a straight upgrade over something like Tribute to the Doom, and gives you more control of which targets you can destroy than something like Fissure or Smashing Grounds, two other cards that saw competitive play over the early days of Yu-Gi-Oh! Because they traded directly 1-for-1 with your opponent's monsters. And while Fissure and Smashing Grounds don't lose you card advantage either, they don't allow you to pick which monster you're destroying. So the targeted nature of Soul Taker has always been pretty good. It's a little bit power creep nowadays, especially with Raigeki being unlimited at 3 copies, but it does remove the card from the field and give your opponent 1000 life points, which might be useful in a Nurse Burn deck. And at number 8, we have Upstart Goblin. This card simply allows you to draw one card, then gives your opponent 1000 life points. And this effect is absolutely amazing. Running 3 copies of Upstart Goblin in your deck basically means you can just run a smaller deck, since it just straight up replaces itself upon resolution of its activation. And your opponent only gains 1000 life points in the process, which is laughable as a detriment to this card's effect. That's why Upstart Goblin has been limited in the TCG for so many years, and was even limited in the early days of Yu-Gi-Oh! Because even back then when life points mattered a little bit more, early Yu-Gi-Oh! Realized the power of Upstart Goblin being at 3 copies, because of just the consistency boost it provided any deck. However, sometimes the 1000 life points it gives your opponent was enough for people to not play the card, even in decks which would be really good, because sometimes there are decks that are trying to OTK their opponent by inflicting nearly exactly 8000 points of damage, so they can't really afford any card that increases their opponent's life points by any measure, even if the rest of the deck is full of cards that do nothing but draw cards, like Golden Bamboo Sword Engine or even Dark World Dealings. And at number 7, we have Chicken Game. Chicken Game is like the field card version of Upstart Goblin, as once per turn you can pay 1000 life points in order to activate one of its 3 effects. And one of those effects is to draw one card. And another one of its effects is it allows you to give your opponent 1000 life points, which is what allows it to technically make this list, even though it's probably never used for that effect. Its most useful effects are usually the ability to draw one card, or its second effect which simply allows you to destroy the card, as both players are able to use this card's effect once per turn. And the reason a player would want to destroy this card is because it also has another passive effect, where the player with the lowest amount of life points doesn't take any damage at all. So you actually can't beat your opponent if Chicken Game is on the field, unless you beat them with a whole bunch of damage all at once. Chicken Game is currently banned in the TCG for its insane draw potential, as the card is also only a soft once per turn, as many people can see in Master Duel where it's currently unlimited at 3 copies and played in a whole bunch of Exodia decks. And at number 6, we have Snatch Steal. This is an equipped spell card which allows you to take control of one of your opponent's monsters, and the drawback to Snatch Steal is that during each of your opponent's standby phases, they gain 1000 life points. Snatch Steal is a really overpowered card that has a hilarious drawback that's not even that bad, because the ability to unconditionally take any monster your opponent controls is a straight +2 in card advantage, as your opponent is simultaneously losing one resource while you gain another, and gets around a lot of monster protection effects, save target immunity. And it doesn't have any limitations on the card you can steal like a whole bunch of other, more modern mind control cards. And it even allows you to use the effects of the monster you steal. So you can just take your opponent's big boss monster, then just use its effect, or get rid of it with some kind of extra deck summoning, after you've used it to attack for damage. Snatch Steal is easily the best card on this list, but the amount of life points it gives your opponent is only 1,000. And this list is more about giving your opponent life points than it is about cards which just happen to give your opponent life points. But the card giving your opponent 1,000 life points every turn potentially is actually pretty decent as far as giving your opponent life points over a period of time, and would unironically make it a pretty decent option for Nurse Burn decks. And at number 5, we have the Paths of Destiny. This is a gamble card which requires both players to toss a coin, and if a player gets heads, then they gain 2,000 life points. If they get tails, then they take 2,000 points of damage instead. Now, the balance when it comes to dealing damage to your opponent's life points with a single card is that a card should deal less than 1,600 points of damage, otherwise you can FTK your opponent with your opening 5 cards in hand. So, any singular card that's able to deal 2,000 points of damage by itself, without requiring other cards to combo with it, has the potential to be really game-breakingly good, which is why it's supposed to be balanced by the gamble nature of it. If the gamble goes off correctly, your opponent takes 2,000 points of damage, then the card is excellent in value. If the gamble goes poorly for you, then your opponent gains 2,000 life points instead, which is supposed to be a huge detriment to yourself. But maybe you can gain 2,000 life points in the process as you get a chance to gamble too. In a Nurse Burn deck though, it's just a pure 2,000 points of damage to your opponent no matter the result. So it's a staple card in decks that are trying to give your opponent life points through card effects because it easily clears a threshold of 1,600 points of damage. And there's also the possibility that you just get an extra 2,000 life points out of it for yourself, which could just be a neat bonus on top of burning your opponent for a ton of damage. And at number 4, we have Try and Guess. This is a trap card which has the effect where you get to declare one extra deck type of monster. Then both players reveal their extra deck, and whoever has more monsters of the declared type gains 3,000 life points. However, the card was made before Link monsters were added to the game, so it only allows you to choose Fusion, Synchro, or Xyz monsters. So if you want to guarantee that your opponent gains 3,000 life points, you can just stack your extra deck with nothing but Link monsters, and then just call one of the other 3 types that you think your opponent might have at least one copy of. A lot of meta decks will play Synchro or Xyz cards, so you might want to wait in order to call one of those, because if neither player has any of the cards of the declared type, then neither player gains any life points and the effect just kind of fizzles out. So it has a chance of failing in giving your opponent life points, but if it does succeed, then it can give 3,000 points of life point gain to your opponent, which converted into damage due to the effects of Samochi or Nurse, easily clears a threshold of 1,600 points of damage. In fact, it's almost 2 times the amount. Cards were really not balanced around dealing 3,000 points of damage to your opponent, which is why it's so rare that there's just unconditional cards that give your opponent a whole bunch of life points, because it gives actual power to Nurse Burn decks. And at number 3, we have Gift Card, a trap card which gives an unconditional 3,000 life points to your opponent, and it's just a better Try and Guess. Gift Card is easily the best card in Nurse Burn decks, and is kind of synonymous with them because if you draw 3 copies of Gift Card, and either of the 2 cards which convert your opponent's life point gains into damage, then you can win with 4 cards in your starting hand, completely ignoring the 5th or 6th depending if you go 1st or 2nd. Because resolving 3 gift cards is 9,000 points of damage to your opponent, and you don't have to worry about any kind of extra deck state like with Try and Guess. Although, since it's 1,000 over, you can also win if you just have 2 copies of Gift Card, and then a single Paths of Destiny, since that comes out to 8,000 points of damage exactly. So, if you get any combination of Gift Cards, Try and Guess, and a single Paths of Destiny, you can burn your opponent with 4 cards in your opening hand for an instant OTK, which is why Nurse Burn decks are kind of powerful as far as gimmick decks go. Especially if you build your whole deck around just trying to get some of these cards out, which is even easier since they're all normal trap cards that can be searched with Trap Trick or Lilith. The next 2 spots on this list are not better than Gift Card for Nurse Burn decks, but they do give your opponent more life points in a more controlled manner, so they are technically better at giving your opponent more life points, even if Gift Card is the king of just unconditionally giving your opponent a whole bunch of life points at once. And at number 2, we have Psychic Eraser Laser. This is a normal spell card which is kind of like a power crept version of Soul Taker, as what it does is allows you to send one of your opponent's monsters to the graveyard that was special summoned from the extra deck, where afterwards your opponent gains life points equal to either its original attack or defense, depending on whichever one of those is higher. The thing that makes Psychic Eraser Laser so good is the fact that the effect does not target, nor does it destroy, which means you can use Psychic Eraser Laser to get rid of normally indestructible extra deck monsters. And a lot of those indestructible extra deck monsters have 3,000 attack, or sometimes they might even have higher values. So because Psychic Eraser Laser has the potential to give your opponent more than 3,000 life points, and also has a really good effect tied to it, It's slightly higher than Gift Card, even if Gift Card is better in Nurse Burn decks because it's easier to use. And at number 1, we have Smile Universe. This is a quick play spell card which allows you to special summon as many of your pendulum monsters from your extra deck face up as possible, but then your opponent gains life points equal to the original attack of all the special summon monsters. However, all the monsters special summoned have their effects negated, and you can't summon other monsters or attack during the turn you activate the effect. And since it's cheating out extra deck pendulum monsters, the cards do need to go to zones that link monsters are pointing to, thanks to Master Rule 4 restrictions that were not lifted on pendulum monsters. But even if you only have 3 zones to point to, there are some pretty high attack pendulum monsters in the game, and you can easily give your opponent more than 8,000 life points with a single resolution of Smile Universe. So, if, for whatever reason, you were playing Bad Reaction to Samochi or Dark Lord Nurse Rafikiel in a pendulum deck, you could easily get more than 8,000 points of damage to your opponent with Smile Universe. So Smile Universe is technically the best card in the game that gives your opponent a whole bunch of life points, and you can directly control how many life points you're giving your opponent, rather than relying on your opponent to summon cards under Dark Soul. So it takes number 1 spot on this list, even though Gift Card is definitely the king of just giving your opponent an unconditional amount of a whole bunch of life points with no setup. Alright, and that's the list. Are there any other cards that give a whole bunch of life points to your opponent they may have missed? Or do you have ideas for future videos just like this one? If so, I'd love to hear about those things down in the comments. Just a quick little aside, I launched a new Hearthstone channel recently, which has videos similar to this channel, i.e. scripted, highly edited top 10s. So if you're a fan of Hearthstone, you should check it out. Link will be in the video description and at the end of this video.